They warned him the painting wept at night. He didn't believe in ghosts until one looked into his soul and whispered his name. Some loves don't begin with a heartbeat. We begin our story now. The auction house smelled of dust and money, of old varnish, of beeswax rubbed into furniture older than anyone in the room, of the particular cold that lives in buildings where nothing is ever truly bought, only transferred from one set of careful hands to another. I stood at the back with my collar turned up and my patience already spent, watching my father do the only thing he had ever loved without reservation, acquire. He sat in the second row, perfectly still, the silver head of his cane resting between his palms. Other men leaned forward when the bidding climbed. Lucius Malfoy never leaned. He let the numbers come to him the way the tide comes to a wall. And when he raised one gloved finger, the auctioneer's voice changed pitch, the way a dog's bark changes when its master finally walks into the yard. I was 19 and bored in the specific, marrow-deep way of someone who has never once had to want for anything. I had come because he asked, and one did not refuse my father a small thing, because the small things were how he measured your willingness to obey in the large ones. So I stood, and I let my eyes wander over the lots not yet called. A clock with too many hands, a writing desk inlaid with bone, a case of dueling pistols that no gentleman in London had needed for a century. And then they brought out the painting, and the boredom went out of me like breath knocked from the chest. She was perhaps my own age, painted half-turned, as though the artist had caught her in the instant of looking back at someone leaving a room. The robes she wore were nothing any woman had worn in my lifetime. Heavy, black, falling in folds that the brush had rendered with such patience I could almost feel the weight of the cloth. A pointed hat sat crooked, as if she had forgotten it was there. None of that held me. What held me were the eyes. Brown, warm, wet with a light the painter should not have been able to trap in pigment, and fixed. I would have sworn it on anything I did not believe in. Directly on me, at the back of that cavernous room, through 40 other bodies and a haze of dust suspended in the chandelier light. Lot 63, the auctioneer said, and cleared his throat in a way that told me, before he spoke, that something about this lot embarrassed him. An unattributed portrait, provenance incomplete. He paused. I am obliged to note that the previous owner's estate was settled under, unfortunate circumstances. A ripple of amusement went through the room. Everyone there knew the story. I learned it later, in pieces, the way one learns the worst things. The man who had owned her last had been found by his housekeeper sitting on the floor of his study at 4 in the morning, the painting taken down and turned to face him, and he had been talking to it. He told the doctors who came for him that the girl wept at night, that he had heard her, soft and steady through the wall, and that when he lit a lamp to comfort her, the sound stopped every time, the moment the flame caught. He had died in a private hospital, insisting on it. The estate wished the picture gone. My father bought her for almost nothing. No one else lifted a hand. I watched the gavel fall and felt, and I want to be precise, because I have spent a long time since trying to be honest about that night. I felt a small, sharp satisfaction, the satisfaction of a skeptic who has just been handed proof of how easily the credulous frighten themselves. A madman heard a painting cry. Of course he did. Madness will hear anything it likes. What I did not say to my father, what I did not say to anyone, was that I wanted her. Not the way one wants a possession. I wanted to be in the room with that gaze. I wanted to be the one it followed. "You may hang it wherever you like," my father said in the car, not looking at me, watching the wet black streets of the city slide past. "I bought it because it was cheap and because the story will entertain at dinner. I have no use for it." "I'll take it," I said. He turned his head then, just slightly, and something moved behind his pale eyes. I have gone back to that moment 100 times, trying to name it, and the closest I can come is that he looked, for half a second, like a man who has watched a child reach toward the one shelf in the house he had hoped they would never notice. Then it was gone, and he looked back at the rain. "As you wish," he said. Our house stood outside the city, all white stone and tall cold windows, the kind of house that is photographed for magazines and never warmed by anyone living in it. My mother arranged flowers in it that no one smelled. My father filled it with objects that no one touched. I had grown up in its corridors, learning that beauty in our family was a thing you stood near to prove you could afford to. And I had decided very young that I would believe in nothing I could not weigh in my own hand. I hung her in my room myself that first night, on the wall facing the bed, where the last of the evening came through the window and lay across her painted face. The housekeeper had not wanted to carry her up. I had seen it in the way the woman held the frame at arm's length, as though the gilt edge were warm. I carried her up alone instead, and the weight of her was ordinary, and the back of the canvas was ordinary, brittle and brown and smelling faintly of the centuries, and I hung her on the brass hook and stepped back and looked at her in the failing light, and she looked at me. "There," I said aloud, to the empty room, to the painted girl, to the dead man's ghost story. "No tears tonight, I think. You've a better view than your last owner gave you." She said nothing, of course. She was paint and oil and old wood, and I was a young man amusing himself in the dark, and I lay down on top of the covers without undressing and watched her until the light went entirely and she became only a paler shape against the wall, the gleam of her eyes the last thing to fade. I slept. I do not know what hour it was when I woke. The house had gone to that absolute stillness it only reached after midnight, when even the radiators stopped their ticking, and the city's glow was too far off to reach my window. I lay on my back with my eyes open in the black, and I listened, and I could not at first have said what I was listening to. It came again, low, continuous, a small, broken intake of breath, and then the long descent of it, the sound a person makes when they have been crying for a long time alone and have stopped expecting anyone to come. It was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the most private sound in the world, and it was coming from the wall where she hung. I lay very still. My heart had begun to do something I did not give it permission to do. The rationale part of me, and I was, then, almost nothing but the rational part, set about its work at once. The house was old. Old houses settle. Pipes contract as they cool. The sound of water moving through them, slowed and distorted by distance and the dark, could imitate almost anything a frightened mind wished to supply. The wind, perhaps, in some flew. a dream not yet fully shaken off. There were a dozen explanations, and I lined them up the way my father lined up his bids, calm, in order, certain that the numbers would come to me. The weeping went on. I reached out, slowly, hating the slowness, hating that my hand had to argue with itself to move at all. And I found the lamp, and I turned the small brass key. The light bloomed, and the room was silent, utterly, instantly silent, as though a hand had been laid flat across the mouth of the sound. The painting hung where I had left it. The girl looked back at me from her half-turn, her brown eyes wet with the light the painter had trapped in them, and her expression had not changed, and could not change, because it was paint, because it was nothing, because the dead man had been mad, and I was not. I sat up. I looked at her for a long time, the lamp burning between us, and I told myself, in the firm interior voice I had been raised to trust above all others, that I had heard nothing at all. But I did not turn the lamp off again, and I did not look away from her painted face. And somewhere underneath the certainty, in a place I had no name for and no map to, something had shifted its weight and settled quietly, like a stone turning over at the bottom of a still pond, and would not be turned back. I left the light burning until morning. In daylight, I was myself again. That is the thing no one warns you of, about the small terrors that visit after midnight, that the morning takes them apart so thoroughly you are almost embarrassed to have held them. I woke to the white London light coming flat and honest through the window, the lamp still burning its useless little flame against the day, and I looked at the painting and saw exactly what a painting is. Pigment laid by a patient hand, a trick of brown eyes angled to follow a viewer, the same trick every competent portraitist has known for 400 years. I rose, I turned off the lamp, I felt the heat of its bulb on the back of my fingers, and I laughed at myself. A short, private breath of a laugh, the kind a man uses to put a thing back in its box. I told no one. There was no one to tell. My father took his coffee in the glass room at the east end of the house, behind a wall of newspaper, and my mother was 3 countries away, doing the thing she did instead of living here, which was to be photographed at other people's houses. The staff moved through the rooms like weather, present and unaddressed. I had grown so accustomed to the silence of that house that it had stopped being silence and become simply the temperature of the air, which is, I think now, why I began to talk to her. It started as mockery. I want to be honest about that, because what it became deserves the dignity of an honest beginning. The first evening I came up and found her there in the dusk, I stopped in the doorway and said, "Still here then? No tears for the new owner?" And I meant it the way one taunts a locked door one has already proved cannot open. The words went out into the room, and the room kept them, the way that house kept everything. And the girl looked back at me from her half-turn with the wet light in her eyes, and I felt, saying it, the smallest loosening in my chest. Speaking aloud in that house was itself a small rebellion. The walls were built for silence. I had put a crack in it, so I did it again. The next night, undressing, throwing my collar over the back of the chair. "You've a better temper this evening, I think. You won't wake me." And the night after, and the night after that, until it was no longer mockery at all, but something I could not have given a name to, if my father had walked in and demanded one. I told her about my day, which was nothing. A tutor I did not need, a luncheon I did not want, the particular boredom of being the heir to a fortune that required nothing of me but that I exist to inherit it. I told her things I had never said to a living person, because a living person would have repeated them, or pitied me, or filed them away to use. She only looked. The not answering was the whole gift of it. I had spent my life among people who wanted something from me, and here at last was a gaze that asked for nothing, and gave me, in return, the one thing I had never had, the sense of being seen by something that would not turn the seeing to its own advantage. I knew how it would sound. I knew precisely how it would sound. The previous owner had sat on his study floor at 4 a.m, talking to her, and they had carried him out in a coat with no buttons. I knew the shape of the thing I was doing, and I did it anyway, and I told myself the difference between us was that I did not believe. He had thought she answered. I knew she did not. A man may talk to the sea and stay sane, so long as he does not expect the sea to talk back. The weeping came again on the 4th night. I had half expected it. I had, if I am truthful, half wanted it, the way one presses a bruise. I lay in the dark and waited, and there it was. That low, broken breath, that long, private descent, threading out of the wall where she hung. And this time, I did not light the lamp at once. This time, I lay still and listened with the cold attention of a man determined to catch the trick of it. I held my own breath so that even that small noise would not foul the experiment. I listened to the radiators which had stopped ticking. I listened to the pipes which were silent. I listened to the wind, of which there was none. The night outside the window was flat and dead and starless, the bare branches of the garden trees not moving at all against the faint city glow. And under all that absence, clear, steady, unmistakably the grief of someone who believes herself unheard, the weeping went on. My hand went to the lamp. I did not decide it. It went the way a hand goes to a wound. The brass key turned. The light came. The silence dropped like a curtain. That same instant, total quenching of the sound, as though it had never been, as though the light itself were a hand laid flat across her mouth. I got up. I crossed the cold floor in my bare feet. I stood close to her, close enough to see the fine cracks in the old varnish, the brushwork that built the wet shine of her eyes out of nothing but skill and oil. And I said, softly, because it was the middle of the night, and the house was listening. The house was always listening. I heard you. She did not answer. Of course she did not answer. But I stood there a long while with a lamp throwing my shadow up the wall beside her frame, and I did not feel like a man who had caught a trick. I felt like a man standing at the door of a room where someone he could not see had just stopped speaking because they heard his footsteps in the hall. The dream came the following week. I want to set it down carefully, because for a long time afterward I could not be sure where the dream had ended, and that uncertainty was the hinge on which everything after it turned. I had fallen asleep with the lamp off, a small act of defiance against my own fear, a refusal to be the dead man on the study floor. And in the dream, the room was exactly the room. The same dark, the same cold, the same pale rectangle of her on the wall. Nothing was changed except that when I said to her, half asleep, the old soft taunt. "No tears tonight, then," she answered me. "Why do you keep speaking to me?" Her voice was not what I would have invented. That is the detail I have turned over most. If I had been making her speak, I would have given her something gentle, something grateful, something shaped to the loneliness in me. Instead, the voice was tired and a little sharp, the voice of someone with no patience left for being studied, and it came not from the air, but from the wall, from inside the frame, low and close. "Because no one else is here," I heard myself say. A silence. Then, "You light the lamp every time. You want to hear me, and you cannot bear to. Which is it?" "You're a painting," I told her in the dream, with the dream's strange flat certainty. "You're paint and oil. You can't be sad. There's nothing inside you to be sad." And she said, and I woke on the word, sitting straight up in the black, with my heart going like a fist on a locked door. She said, "Then why are you the only one who comes when I cry?" The room was dark and silent. The painting was a pale shape on the wall. I sat with the bedclothes twisted in my hands and my breath loud in my own ears, and I told myself, with everything I had left, that a dream is only the mind rehearsing its own fears in borrowed voices. I had given her that voice. I had written that line. The tired sharpness, the question I could not answer, all of it mine, dredged up out of sleep and dressed in her painted face. That is what dreams are. I knew what dreams are. I lay back down. I did not light the lamp. It felt, that night, important not to, as though lighting it would be an admission, and I had decided I would admit nothing. I lay in the dark, facing the wall where she hung, and I made myself breathe slowly, and I waited for sleep, and the house was silent, and there was no weeping, and after a long time the grey began to come up at the edges of the curtains, and I understood I would not sleep again. It was in that grey, half-light hour, the hour when the rational mind is at its weakest, worn thin by the long dark, not yet braced by the day, that I did the thing I had sworn I would not do. I got up. I went to her. I stood in front of the painting in the cold, colourless dawn, and I looked at the wet brown eyes the painter had trapped in their forever half-turn. And I said, aloud, in a voice that did not sound like mine, "If you can hear me, if there is anything of you in there at all, say something, anything. I won't tell. I'll never tell a soul." The grey light strengthened by a degree. Somewhere far below in the house, a door closed and a tap ran. The staff were waking. The day was assembling itself. The world of weighable things was sliding back into place around me. The painting looked at me and did not speak. It was paint. It was oil. It was a dead man's madness and a frightened boy's sleeplessness. And nothing at all. I felt the foolishness of it come over me like cold water, and I turned to go back to the bed and salvage what dignity a man can salvage from begging a portrait to talk to him at dawn. I had taken one step when I heard it. Not weeping, not the dream. A whisper, thin as the draught under a door, real as the cold of the floor on my bare feet, shaped unmistakably into a single word, and coming from low in the frame behind me as I walked away. I stopped. I did not turn around. I stood in the centre of my own room, with the dawn coming up grey and merciless through the curtains, and my back to the painting, and every certainty I had ever owned draining out through the soles of my feet. And I made myself breathe, and I made myself think, and the whisper came again, closer now, or only clearer, the way a sound becomes clearer when you have finally stopped refusing to hear it. And this time there was no lamp to turn on, no light to lay its hand across her mouth, no experiment left to run, and no explanation left to line up in order. There was only the grey room and my own held breath, and the single word she had spoken into the silence I had begged her to fill. Help. That was the word. One word, thin as the breath that carried it, and yet it went through me with the force of a struck bell. I stood with my back to her in the grey dawn, and I did not move, because moving would mean deciding what I had heard, and I was not ready to decide. A man can stand a long time at the edge of a thing he cannot afford to believe. Then I turned around. The painting hung where it had always hung. The girl looked back from her eternal half-turn, the wet light in her brown eyes, the crooked hat, the heavy black robes the painter had rendered with such terrible patience. Nothing had changed in her. Nothing ever changed in her. That was the unbearable part, that whatever spoke from inside the frame could not so much as alter the angle of its painted head to prove itself to me. I crossed the floor. I put my face close to hers, close enough that my breath fogged faintly on the cold varnish, and I said, low, "Say it again." Silence. The long, ordinary silence of an object. "Say it again," I said. "I heard you. I'm not mad, and I'm not asleep, and I heard you. Say it again." Nothing. The day was coming up properly now, gold beginning to edge the grey at the curtains, the house assembling its noises below me, and I understood, with the cold clarity that comes after a sleepless night, that the daylight was her enemy. She had wept only in the dark. She had answered only in the dream and the dawn. The light laid its hand across her mouth every single time, and now the light was coming, and she had spent whatever she had to spend on that one word, and could spend no more. I should tell you what a sane man does at this point. A sane man does not stand in his bedroom at dawn interrogating a portrait. A sane man remembers the previous owner, carried out in a coat with no buttons, insisting to the doctors that she wept. A sane man recognizes the symptom in himself and goes quietly to find someone to talk to who is made of more than oil and dread. I had been raised to be that sane man. I had built my whole self around being him, the skeptic, the one who weighed things in his own hand, the one who did not frighten himself with stories. And so what rose in me, there in the strengthening light, was not wonder. It was not even fear, not yet. It was something colder and older and far more honest than either. The animal need to make the strange thing stop being strange. To put it somewhere I could not hear it. To make my room my own again. "No," I said aloud, to her, to myself, to the dead man's ghost. "No, I won't do this." I took her off the wall. I remember the weight of her in my arms, exactly as ordinary as it had been the night I carried her up. Brittle wood, taut canvas, the gilt frame cold against my forearms. I remember that I would not look at her painted face while I carried her, that I held her turned away from me as a man holds something he has decided not to love. I carried her down through the waking house, past a maid who pressed herself to the wall to let me by and said nothing, down the back stair, down past the kitchens, down to the cellar where my father kept the wine and the things the house had finished with. The broken clock, the furniture out of fashion, the crates that came and were never opened. It was cold down there, and dark, and it smelled of stone and dust and the faint vinegar ghost of old wine. I set her against the far wall, face to the brick, the way you turn a mirror in a house of mourning. I stood back. My breath made small clouds in the cellar chill. "There," I said. My voice didn't sound the way I wanted it to. "There. You can cry all you like now. No one will come. No one will ever come." And I went back up the stairs and I closed the cellar door. And for the first time in many nights, I lay down in my own room with no painting on the wall facing my bed, only a pale, clean rectangle on the wallpaper where the sun had not faded it. And I slept the heavy, dreamless sleep of a man who has put a thing where it cannot reach him. It should have ended there. I have asked myself a great many times why it did not. The first day was easy. I told myself I had done the obvious, sensible thing, removed the source of a disturbance, whatever its true nature, and good riddance. I rode in the morning. I sat through a luncheon. I was, by every outward measure, restored. The second day, the rectangle on the wall began to bother me. Not the painting, the absence of it. The clean, unfaded square where she had hung, staring at me from across the room, more present in its emptiness than she had ever been in her frame. I found my eyes going to it. I found myself, twice, beginning to speak into the room out of habit, before I remembered there was no longer anyone there to not answer me. The third day, I went down to the cellar. I told myself it was to check that the damp was not getting into the canvas, that whatever the picture was worth, my father would not thank me for letting it rot, and so I owed it that small custodial care. I believed this for exactly as long as it took me to descend the stair. Then I was standing in front of her in the dark, having turned the frame around to face me with hands that were not quite steady, and I was not checking the canvas for damp. I was looking into her wet brown eyes in the light of the single bare bulb, and I was waiting. "Well," I said, "here I am. You wanted help. You said it yourself. One word, clear as anything. So," I spread my hands. "Help with what? Tell me. I came all the way down here. I'm listening. Speak." She did not speak. The bulb hummed faintly overhead. Somewhere, a pipe knocked once and was still. Her eyes held the trapped light and gave me nothing, and I stood in that cold and waited, and the minutes went by, and I felt the particular humiliation of a man who has come back, against all his own resolutions, to a door he himself nailed shut and found it still shut. "Fine," I said at last, my breath clouding. "Fine. Sulk, then. Your paint. I don't know why I turned the frame back to the wall, harder than I needed to, the wood cracking against the brick, and I went up. And I told myself, climbing, that this was the end of it, truly the end, that I had given the thing every chance a reasonable man could give, and it had failed every test, and I would not come down again. I came down again the next day, and the day after that, each time the same. I would descend with some pretext I no longer bothered to believe. I would turn her to face me. I would talk, sometimes coaxing, sometimes furious, once, near the end, very quietly, almost pleading. And she would look at me with her painted grief and her painted patience, and she would not answer, and I would turn her back to the wall and climb the stairs in a state I had no word for, a state somewhere between grief and shame, and a longing so absurd I could not have spoken it aloud to a single living soul. I was losing weight. I saw it in the glass without caring. I slept badly in a room that felt, with her gone from it, not empty, but vacated, as though something had been taken out of it that the room itself missed. The clean rectangle on the wall watched me at night. I began to hate it more than I had ever feared her weeping. On the 7th night, I gave up the pretense entirely. I did not invent a reason. I rose from a bed I could not sleep in, sometime past 2, and I went down through the dark house in my bare feet with no candle and no lie, down the back stair, past the kitchens, down into the cold that smelled of stone and old wine, and I did not turn on the bulb. I turned her to face me in the dark, and I sat down on the cellar floor with my back against a wine crate, the way the dead man had sat on his study floor. And I understood as I did it that I had become him, that there was no longer any difference between us, and I found I did not care. "I can't stop," I said into the dark, to the painting I could not see, only feel the pale shape of her face floating in the black before me. "Do you understand? I had a life. It was a stupid life, an empty one, but it was mine, and I knew the rules of it. And now I can't sleep, and I can't eat, and I come down to a cellar in the middle of the night to talk to a picture, and I don't even know your name. I don't know your name. I've gone mad over something that doesn't have a name." The dark was absolute. The cold worked into me through the stone, and in that black, with no light to silence her, and no day to seal her mouth, with my eyes open on nothing, and my whole self stripped down at last to the one true thing under all the skepticism and the pride, she spoke, not weeping, not a single word flung out and spent. A whole sentence, low and clear and close, the tired, sharp voice from the dream made real in the waking dark, and it came not from across the cellar, but from very near, as though she had leaned out of the frame to reach me. "Then take me upstairs," she said, "and I'll tell you my name, and after that I'll tell you what was done to me, but not down here in the cold where he liked to keep us. Take me up to the light, Draco. I have waited so long for someone who would not run." I sat frozen on the cellar floor in the absolute dark, my own name in her mouth, my name, which I had never once spoken aloud to her, ringing in the black between us, and I understood that there was no road back now to the man I had been at the auction, the bored skeptic at the rear of the room, and that whatever came next, I had already, without deciding it, chosen to follow her into. I carried her up. I did it in the dark, which I think now was its own small act of faith. I did not turn on the cellar bulb, did not flood the moment with the light that had always silenced her, but lifted her blind from the stone floor and held her, this time facing me, against my chest, her painted face close to mine in the black. The weight of her was the same ordinary weight it had always been. That was the thing I could never reconcile, all the way up the stairs, that something which had spoken my name should weigh no more than wood and canvas and old paint, should feel in my arms like nothing but an object I had decided to save. I brought her to my room. The window was full of the deep blue that comes before any hint of dawn, and by it I could just make out the brass hook, the clean, unfaded rectangle where she belonged. I hung her there. I stepped back. And then, because I had learned my lesson, because I knew now that the light was the enemy of her voice, I did not turn on the lamp. I sat down on the edge of the bed in the blue dark, and I waited, and my heart was going hard and slow, and I said, "All right, I've brought you up. Tell me your name." For a long moment there was only the silence of the sleeping house. Then the voice came, low and close from the wall. "Hermione," she said. "My name is Hermione Granger. I have heard a great many names in my life. I have sat at tables where the names alone were worth more than most men earn in a lifetime. Names with castles and companies and centuries hung off them like jewels. None of them ever did to me what that one plain name did, spoken in the dark by a girl who was not there. I said it back to her, Hermione, to feel the shape of it, and something in the room seemed to ease, the way a held breath eases, as though a thing long denied had finally been allowed. "How?" I began, and stopped, because there were too many hows, and I did not know which to ask first. "How is this possible? What are you? What were you before—" I gestured uselessly at the frame she could not have seen me gesture toward. "Before this?" "I was a girl," she said. "A living girl the same as you are a living boy. I had a mother and a father. I had friends. I had a whole life in front of me, and a war behind me that I had helped to win. And I thought—" The voice wavered, the first crack I had heard in it. "I thought the danger was over. That was my mistake. I thought when the bad men fell that all the bad men had fallen. But there is always one more. There is always the one who slips away while everyone is celebrating and goes home and locks his door and begins, quietly, to do the thing he was always going to do." "A man took you," I said. "A man took me." A pause. "He is a painter. That is what he is to the world. A painter, eccentric, reclusive, very gifted, the sort of man whose strangeness everyone forgives because his pictures are so beautiful. And they are beautiful. That is the horror of it. He paints girls. He has painted a great many girls." The voice dropped lower and colder. "I am not the first to hang on a stranger's wall, Draco. I am not even the 10th. The blue at the window had begun very faintly to pale. I could see her now, the half-turn, the brown eyes, the crooked hat, emerging by degrees out of the dark as the dawn came, and I knew that when it came in earnest, she would fall silent again, and there was so much I did not yet understand. "Then where are you?" I said, fast, leaning toward her. "If you're a girl, a living girl, where are you? You're here, you're paint, you're on my wall. How can you be a girl somewhere as well?" "Because he did not paint me," she said. "Not the way you mean. He did not sit me down and copy my face onto a canvas and let me go. He put me into it. The part of me that thinks, that grieves, that is speaking to you now. He drew it out of my body the way you would draw water from a well, and he sealed it in the paint, and what is left of my body, the breathing part, the part with a heartbeat." The voice broke fully now, and what came through it was not the tired sharpness anymore, but raw, exhausted terror. "He keeps, somewhere, alive but not awake. Sleeping the way the others slept, until the sleep became the other thing. My family buried an empty grave, Draco. They have a stone with my name on it. They mourn me as dead, and I am not dead. I am split, half of me sealed in oil on a rich man's wall, and half of me lying in the dark in his house with my heart still beating, and no one in the world who knows that I am still in it." I sat very still. The The dawn came up grey and then gold at the edges of the curtains, and her voice was thinning now, growing faint, the light laying its slow hand across her mouth, and I knew I had only moments. "Why me?" I said. "Why can I hear you when no one else?" "Because of what you are." The words came faint, hurried, racing the light. "I felt it the moment your father carried me into your cold white house. There is old blood in you, Draco, old and strong and asleep, the way mine was sealed asleep. Yours has been sealed too, but by your own family, by choice, generations of it. You come from mages. You come from one of the oldest lines there is, and someone in your house has spent a lifetime making certain you never learn it. The lamp could silence me from the others, because the others were only men. It could never truly silence me from you. You have always half heard me. You heard me the first night, and you called it pipes." The light was almost full now. Her voice was a thread. "Your parents are hiding the truth from you," she breathed. "All of it. What you are, where you come from, and in your own cellar, Draco. While I sat down there in the cold these 7 days, I saw it. In the dark, in the far corner, behind the crates your father never opens. A cabinet. Tall, black, carved. A vanishing cabinet. They do not belong in the houses of ordinary men. It is a door. It leads out of this world of weighable things and into the real one, into the world your family came from and renounced. And if you can find the other one it is twinned with, you can walk through it, and everything I have told you, everything you are afraid to believe, you will see with your own." The sun crested the garden wall and came in white and full across her face, and her voice stopped as though a string had been cut. The painting hung silent on the wall, paint and oil and old wood, the brown eyes wet with their trapped and frozen light, looking back at me from a half-turn that had not changed and would not change, no matter how long I sat and begged it to. I did not beg it. Not this time. I sat on the edge of my bed in the full light of morning, and I did not feel like a man who had been talking to a picture. I felt like a man who had been handed a key in the dark and told there was a door, and who now had to decide, in the cold daylight, whether he had the courage to go looking for the lock. For a long while, I did nothing. The sensible voice in me, quieter now, but not yet dead, made its last case. A cabinet in the cellar proved nothing. There had always been junk in the cellar. My father bought things and forgot them. That was the whole architecture of his life. I had built an enormous structure of belief on a girl's voice in the dark and a dead man's madness, and the structure could come down with a single afternoon's honest looking. Go down. Find the cabinet. Find that it is an ordinary cabinet, black and carved and worth a great deal of money and nothing more. And then sleep, finally, and be well, and forget. I rose. I dressed. I went down through the house in the broad, ordinary light of a weekday morning, past the maid with her duster, past the smell of my father's coffee from the glass room, down the back stair, past the kitchens, down into the cellar that smelled of stone and old wine. And I turned on the bulb this time because I wanted to see. I wanted the plain, unanswerable evidence of my own eyes. The crates stood where they had always stood. The broken clock, the chairs no one sat in. I went past them, into the far corner, the dark corner the single bulb did not reach, and I had to move a stack of wooden cases to get to it, my hands clumsy with a feeling I would not name. and behind them, against the brick, draped in a sheet of canvas gone stiff and grey with years of dust, stood something tall. I took hold of the canvas. I stood there a moment with it gripped in my fist, the dust of decades coming off on my fingers, my heart going like something trying to get out of my chest. And I told myself one last time that it would be nothing, that it would be a wardrobe, a press, an ordinary thing, and that I would laugh and be free. I pulled the sheet away. It was black, and it was tall, taller than a man, and it was carved over every inch of its surface with figures and vines and faces that seemed to shift when I did not look at them directly. And where an ordinary cabinet would have had a maker's mark or a keyhole, this one had a single word burned deep into the wood above the door, in letters of a shape I had never been taught to read, but somehow impossibly understood, the way you understand a voice in a dream. And as I stood there with the dust settling around me and the word burning up at me out of the black wood, I heard, from far above, 2 floors up, faint but unmistakable through all that stone and silence, my father's footsteps cross the hall toward the cellar door. I did not move. The footsteps crossed the hall above me, unhurried, even. My father never hurried. Hurry was for men who feared losing things, and my father had never once in my hearing feared anything. And they came toward the cellar door, and I stood in the dark corner with the dust of decades settling on my shoulders, and the dropped sheet at my feet, and the black cabinet looming at my back like a held breath. There was nowhere to go. The cellar had one stair, and he was at the top of it. The footsteps reached the door. They stopped. I heard his hand on the latch, the small iron click of it lifting, and then a voice, not his, one of the staff, calling something from the far end of the hall, a question about the afternoon's arrangements, the ordinary machinery of the house turning over. And my father's hand left the latch. The footsteps withdrew. I stood in the dark and listened to them go, listened until the hall above me was silent again, and only then did I let the breath out of my chest, slow, through my teeth, and discover that my hands were shaking. I covered the cabinet. I dragged the cases back in front of it. I went up into the daylight, and I sat through a luncheon across the long table from my father, and I watched him eat, this pale, unhurried man who had bought me a weeping painting for the price of a story and told me he had no use for it. And I thought, you know what is in your cellar. You have always known. You renounced it, and you draped it in canvas, and you have spent my entire life making certain I would never pull the sheet away. And he passed me the salt and asked whether I had slept, and I said yes, and we did not speak again. She had told me the truth. I knew it now in the place under the place where the sensible voice lived, knew it the way you know a thing in the body before the mind consents to it. There was a door in my own cellar to a world I had been raised to believe did not exist, and the man who had raised me to believe it knew the door was there and had hidden it, and the only reason I had ever found it was that a girl sealed in oil had seen it from across a dark room and trusted me enough to point. I went back to her that night. I did not turn on the lamp. I found it, I said into the dark. The cabinet. It's there, exactly where you said. He nearly caught me. He came to the door. A silence. Then her voice, low and careful. Did he see you? No. Then he doesn't know you've found it. Relief threaded the words, and under the relief, something tighter. Listen to me, Draco. The cabinet is one of a pair. They are made to be twinned. What goes into one comes out of the other, however far apart they stand. The one in your cellar leads somewhere. I do not know where. I only saw it the once, in the dark, and could not read the binding word burned above its door. I read it, I said. The dark went very still. You read it, she repeated. I don't know how. I was never taught, but I stood in front of it, and the word was there, and I understood it, the way you understand a thing in a dream. I swallowed. It said manna, just that, manna. The breath she drew was long and shaking, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. There was awe in it, and fear, and a fierce rising hope she was trying and failing to keep down. Then it is true, she said. Everything I felt the moment I came into this house, the old blood, the sealed line. Draco, a vanishing cabinet, does not bind itself to a place unless it was made to serve one house, one family, across the generations. Manna. It leads to your family's true seat, to the house your grandfather lived in and your father turned his back on, to the Malfoy Manor, the real one in the real world, behind the door you were never meant to find. And if I go through it, I said, if you go through it, you will be standing in the world I was stolen out of, the world where I am still, somewhere, breathing. Her voice dropped. And the world where the man who took me still keeps his other paintings, the girls who came before me, the ones who are no longer... She stopped. You would not be safe there, Draco. You would not have the first idea how to be safe. You would be a man who has never cast a spell walking into a world that runs on nothing else. He would find you before you found me. They always do. Then teach me, I said. I can't teach you. I am paint on a wall. I cannot hold a wand to show you the motion of it. Then I'll learn. Something had hardened in me, there in the dark, something I did not recognize and did not want to examine, a resolve with no precedent in the soft-board life I had led. You said old blood, sealed, but mine. If it's in me, I'll find it. I'll go through, and I'll find the manor, and I'll find a way to wake what your painter put to sleep in me, the way he put you to sleep in oil. And then I'll come back for you, and we'll find you, the breathing you. A long silence. When she spoke, her voice had gone very soft and very tired and very afraid for me. And underneath all three there was the thing neither of us would name yet. The thing that had been building in that dark room across all those nights of one-sided talk, made suddenly two-sided. You don't even know me, she said. I know your name, I said. I know your voice. I know you wept in the dark for years, and no one came. And the first man who heard you took you down to a cellar to make you stop. And you forgave him, because here you are, telling him how to save you. That's enough. That's more than I've ever known about anyone. She did not answer that, but the silence afterward was not empty. It was the silence of two people who have just stood very close to the edge of saying something and stepped back together by agreement, because there was work to do first, and the saying would keep. I went through the cabinet the next night. I will not pretend I was not afraid. I stood in the cellar at 2 a.m. with a candle in my hand. I had brought one because I did not know what I would find on the other side, and the thought of arriving in pure dark in a strange world was more than I could bear. I moved the cases away and pulled the sheet off and opened the black carved door. And inside there was nothing. No back panel, no depth. Only a dark that the candle would not penetrate, a dark that seemed to lean toward me, hungry and patient. I thought of every reason to close the door and go back upstairs to my bed and my fortune and my safe, weighable life. I thought of her voice saying, "Take me up to the light." I stepped inside and pulled the door closed behind me. The dark took me. There is no other way to say it. For a moment that had no length, that I cannot place in any honest accounting of time, I was nowhere. I was nothing. The candle gone out, though no breath had touched it, and a pressure on me from all sides like deep water, like the moment before sleep, like the inside of the word that had been burned above the door. And then a different door, in front of me now, swung open of its own accord onto a different dark, and I stepped out, and I was somewhere else. The cold hit me first. Not the dry chill of a London cellar, but a vast, living cold. The cold of a place that had not been warm in a very long time. I stood at the foot of a great stone stair in a hall so large my relit candle could not find its ceiling. Tapestries hung rotting on the walls. Dust lay over everything like grey snow, undisturbed, ankle-deep in the corners. And the silence was not the silence of my father's house, which was the silence of people choosing not to speak. This was the silence of a place where there had been no one to speak for years. I was in the manor, the real one. I knew it the way I had known the word, in the blood, under the mind. I went up the stair. I do not know what drew me. I only know that my feet found the way through that ruined grandeur as though they had walked it before, as though some sealed thing in me was waking and remembering and steering me, down a long gallery hung with portraits whose faces had been slashed or turned to the wall. Through a door that opened to my hand, though the lock was rusted solid, and into a small round room at the top of a tower where the dust on a single table had been disturbed. By my own arrival, I thought at first, and then understood, with a chill that had nothing to do with the cold, that it had been disturbed long before, that something had lain on this table and been taken away, and the shape of it was still printed faint in the grey dust. Beside that shape, half buried, lay a wand. I knew it was a wand, though I had never held one. Pale wood, worn smooth at the grip, longer than I expected, and warmer, somehow, than the freezing air around it. My grandfather's, I thought, the man who had lived here, who had not renounced what my father renounced. I reached for it. My fingers closed around the grip, and the moment they did, the sealed thing in me did not wake gently. It broke open. A current went up my arm and into my chest and behind my eyes, a heat and a roaring. Generations of bound and buried power tearing loose all at once, and the candle flame leapt the height of my arm, and every slashed portrait in the gallery below screamed at once in voices I could hear through the floor, and I heard myself say a word I had never learned in a language I did not speak. And the dust on the table rose up off the wood in a single shining sheet and hung in the air, and I understood, gripping my grandfather's wand in a dead man's tower with the whole renounced inheritance of my blood blazing up through me at last, that there was no longer the smallest possibility of going back to being the man I had been, and that somewhere in this cold and ruined world a girl was breathing in the dark, and I was, at last, and against everything, the kind of man who could go and find her. The power did not leave me when the dust settled. That was the first thing I learned about what I was. It did not come and go like a mood. Once woken, it stayed. A low, constant heat behind the sternum, a hum in the bones of the hand that held the wand, as though some instrument long unstrung had been tuned at last and would not now consent to fall silent. I stood in the tower room with my grandfather's wand warm in my fist and the screaming of the slashed portraits fading away below me, and I was shaking, and I was not afraid. That was the strangest part. A man should be afraid, finding this in himself. I was not. I felt, for the first time in my whole bored, gilded life, that I had been put right, that the empty White House and the unhurried father and the boredom that went down to the marrow had all been the symptoms of a single great wrongness. And the wrongness was this, that I had been built for a world and kept out of it, and now the door had opened and the missing half of me had come flooding home. I learned to use it the way you learn to use a hand you did not know was numb. Clumsily at first, then less so. I raised the wand toward the relit candle and thought brighter, and the flames swelled into a white globe that lit the whole round room. I thought gone, and it snuffed to a thread. I lifted a fallen chair from across the room without crossing to it. Each small success sent the heat in my chest higher, surer, and each time I half expected the sensible voice to rise up and tell me I had imagined it. And each time the voice did not come, because the voice had been the sound of the sealed thing pressing against its seal, and the seal was broken now, and the voice had nothing left to say. I did not stay long that first night. I did not yet trust the cabinet to carry me both ways, and the thought of being stranded in that cold, ruined world before I knew its rules turned my stomach. I went back down the great stair, through the hall of grey snow dust, into the black carved twin of the cabinet that stood, I saw now, in an alcove off the entrance hall, draped in no sheet, waiting as though the house had always expected someone to come back through it. I stepped in. The dark took me. The pressure, the nowhere, the inside of the word. And then I was standing in my own cellar again, with my grandfather's wand in my hand, and the smell of London wine in my nose, and 2 floors above me, the ordinary house slept on, never knowing that its air had crossed out of the world and back inside the turning of a single hour. I went up to her. I did not turn on the lamp. I never turned on the lamp now. I went through, I said into the dark. I was in the manor, the real one, and I found... I held up the wand, foolishly, to a painting that could not see it. I found his wand, my grandfather's, and when I touched it, Hermione, something woke. The thing you felt in me. It's awake. I can. I did magic. I made light. I lifted a chair across a room without touching it. The silence that came back at me was so long, I thought the dawn had taken her early. Then her voice, very quiet, with something in it I had not heard before. Not fear for me, not the tired sharpness, but a kind of wonder turned painful at the edges. You did all that in one night, she said, untaught, sealed your whole life and woken an hour ago. A pause. Draco, it took the rest of us years. We had teachers. We had schools. Wands fitted to us. Masters who'd done it for 1,000 years before us. And you walked into a dead man's tower and made light on the first night, because the blood in you is so old it remembered how before you did. Her voice dropped. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what you could be? I don't care what I could be, I said, and found as I said it that it was true. I care that you're somewhere in that world breathing in the dark, and I can get there now. That's all the magic is good for, as far as I'm concerned. Tell me how to find you. I don't know where I am. The wonder went out of her voice, and the fear came back. That's the cruelty of it. He drew me out and sealed me before he hid the body. I never saw the room I sleep in. I only know it's his, that it's in his house, wherever his house stands with the others. Then tell me about him. Everything. We'll find the house, and then we'll find you in it. And so, across the last hour before the dawn, she told me about the painter. She did not know his true name. None of them had. He took the girls by a method she only half understood. A charm of luring, a beauty in his voice and his manner that made you trust him, made you follow him somewhere quiet, made you sit for him just for a sketch, while the real thing was done to you so gently you did not feel it leave. He had been doing it for a very long time, longer than one lifetime, she thought. There was something wrong with how he aged, or did not age. He sold the paintings, always. That was the part that had haunted her most, lying sealed on the wall of one buyer after another. He did not keep his trophies close. He scattered them. He sent the sealed halves of murdered girls out into the houses of rich strangers all across the world, so that no one collector would ever hold two, so that no pattern could ever be drawn, so that the bodies in his house could sleep undisturbed and unsuspected, while the souls hung decorating other men's walls 100 miles apart. The others, I said. The girls before you. You said they're gone. The word came out of her like something torn. I felt them go. When you are sealed, Draco, you are not alone. You can feel the others who were sealed near the same time, faint, like hearing someone breathing in the next room. There were 9 of us when I was taken. One by one, over the years, the breathing in the next rooms stopped. The body cannot live forever split from its soul. It sleeps, and the sleep deepens, and then one night it simply does not breathe again, and the half on the wall feels it happen and goes, quiet, hollow, still a picture, still able to weep, but with no one left inside the body to weep for. Her voice was shaking now, racing the light that was beginning again to grey the curtains. I am the last of my 9, the last one still split, the last one whose body still breathes. I have felt the others go out one by one in the dark, and I have lain on a stranger's wall counting how many of us are left. And now there is only me, Draco. And I don't know how long my body has. The sleep is deepening. I can feel it deepening even now. There is not much time left before I go quiet too, and then it will not matter that you can find his house, because there will be nothing in it to wake. The grey was strengthening, her voice was thinning, and I stood in the dark with my grandfather's wand in my hand and the old blood roaring in me. And I understood that the slow, patient courtship of those nights of talking, the careful stepping toward and back, the thing neither of us would name, that all of it had just been handed a clock, and the clock was running down. How do I find his house? I said, fast, leaning in. Give me anything. One thing. The smallest thing you remember from the day he took you." The light was almost up. Her voice was a thread now, fraying. "A bell," she breathed. "There was a bell. After he sat me down to sketch me, before the dark came, I heard a bell, very deep, very slow, the kind that is rung for the dead, 3 times. And I thought, how strange, a funeral bell in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. It was close. It was just outside. His house stands within the sound of a great slow bell that is rung for the dead, and there cannot be so many of those, Draco. There cannot be so." The sun crested the wall and came in white across her face, and the thread snapped, and she was silent. I stood holding the wand. A bell rung for the dead, deep and slow, 3 times in an ordinary afternoon. It was almost nothing. It was a single thread to follow across an entire hidden world I did not know the map of. But it was a thread, and I had a wand, and I had blood that remembered things I had never learned, and I admitted it to myself at last, standing there in the cold, clean morning light. I had a reason now that was no longer only mercy, no longer only the saving of a stranger. I went down to the cellar. I sat on the floor in front of the twin door that was not there, the London cabinet, and I took my grandfather's wand, and I thought of the manor on the other side, the gallery of slashed portraits, the libraries that must lie behind those rotting doors, the whole renounced inheritance of a family that had once known everything this hidden world had to teach. Somewhere in that dead house there would be books, maps, a way to find a bell rung for the dead within the sound of a murderer's window. My father had turned his back on all of it. I would not. I would go through, and I would read every book in that ruined library until I found her, and I would do it before the sleep in her sleeping body deepened past the place from which anyone comes back. I opened the cabinet. The dark leaned toward me, patient and hungry, the inside of the word. And as I rose to step into it, wand in hand, I heard, from the top of the cellar stair, where I had been so certain no one ever came at this hour, the small iron click of the latch lifting, and my father's unhurried voice, low and terribly calm, saying into the dark, "I wondered how long it would take you to find the door." I turned with the wand still in my hand. My father came down the cellar stair the way he came down everything, without hurry, without sound, one gloved hand trailing the rail. He had dressed, though it was barely dawn. He was never anything but dressed, never once in my life caught unmade, and the sight of him there in his dark coat against the grey stone, perfectly composed, looking at the wand in my fist with no surprise at all, frightened me more than any shout could have. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom. He looked at me, and at the open black cabinet behind me, and at the wand, and something moved in his pale face that I had spent 19 years never once seeing there. It was grief. "Put it down, Draco," he said quietly. "You don't know what you've woken. You don't know what it costs." "You knew." My voice came out rougher than I meant. "All my life, you knew what was down here and what's on the other side of it and what I am, and you hid it. You raised me in that mausoleum upstairs, that empty white box, and you let me think I was nothing, that there was nothing, that the world was only what you could buy and weigh, and the whole time..." I lifted the wand. "The whole time this was mine. Yes, He did not flinch from the wand. Yes, I knew, and I would do it again. Do you imagine I renounced it for nothing? Do you imagine a man turns his back on this kind of power for sport? His voice did not rise, but it sharpened, and the sharpening was worse than rage. My father lived in that manner on the other side of that door. Your grandfather. He was the most gifted wizard of his age and the cruelest man I ever knew, and the power you are holding in your hand made him both. It does not make you better, Draco. It makes you more of whatever you already are, and we are not, in this family, made of kind things. I watched what it did to him. I watched it eat everything in him that could love, and I swore that whatever else I gave you, I would not give you that. So I sealed it. I married a woman with no drop of it in her veins. I raised you in a house with no magic in it and no story behind it, and I let you be bored and safe and ordinary, because bored and safe and ordinary is so much more than my father ever let anyone near him be. His hand tightened on the rail. I was protecting you. From it. From them. From yourself. I had been ready for many things. I had been ready for fury for a man defending a guilty secret. I was not ready for this. For a father who had buried my birthright out of fear that it would unmake me, who had given me a small grey life as the only gift he believed safe to give. For a moment, the wand wavered in my hand. Then I thought of her. The breathing in the next rooms going out one by one. The last of her 9, the sleep deepening even now. There's a girl, I said. On the other side. In this world you sealed me out of to keep me safe. A living girl split in two by a man who paints them and sells their souls and keeps their bodies sleeping until they die. She's the last of 9. The other 8 are dead because no one came. And she came to me, father, the boy you made bored and safe and ordinary, because I was the only one left in any world who could still half hear her crying through the wall. You sealed me to keep me from becoming your father. Fine, I believe you. But you also sealed me away from the one thing I have ever in my life wanted to do, which is go through that door and find her before she goes quiet. And I am going to do it, with or without your blessing. I'd rather have it, but I'm going. He looked at me for a long time. The dawn was coming grey through the cellar's one high window, laying its slow light over the dust and the crates and the two of us, the renouncing father and the woken son, on either side of the open dark. The painter, he said at last, not a question. You know of him. Every one of the old blood knows of him. His mouth tightened. He is older than he should be. He has been taking girls for longer than any one life, and no one has ever stopped him, because he never keeps 2 trophies in one place, and he never takes from the families strong enough to hunt him. He takes the brave ones, the clever ones, the ones who think the war is over. He closed his eyes briefly. If your girl is the last of 9, then he has been quiet a long time, and a long quiet thing is the most dangerous thing there is. You cannot go after him untaught and alone. You will become his 10th, and a portrait of you will hang on a stranger's wall, and I will have buried 2 empty graves instead of 1. Then come with me, I said. The words surprised us both. His eyes opened. You have the blood too, I said. You sealed yours by choice, not by force. You can unseal it the same way. Come with me. Teach me on the other side. Help me find her. You spent my whole life keeping me from this world to protect me. Protect me in it instead. I lowered the wand, slowly, the first peace offering I had ever made the man. She heard a bell, the day he took her, deep and slow, rung for the dead, 3 times, close enough to be just outside his window. That's all we have, one bell in a whole hidden world. But you know that world. You grew up in it. Help me find the bell, Father, and we'll find her. And then I swear to you, I'll close the door behind us forever and be as bored and safe and ordinary as you ever wanted for the rest of my life, but not until she's free. For a long moment, he said nothing, and I watched the war go on behind his still pale face. The fear that had governed his whole life set against the sun standing in front of him, asking for the first time not to be kept safe, but to be helped into danger. And I understood, watching it, that I was asking him to undo the single great act of his life, the renunciation he had built everything on, and that whatever he answered would cost him more than I could yet measure. A bell rung 3 times for the dead, he said slowly, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. Something shifted in his face, recognition, dawning and terrible. There is a place in the old country, a town that keeps the old custom, 3 strokes of the great bell at the death of any soul in the parish, at whatever hour it falls. I was taken there once, as a boy. My father had business with a man who lived in the shadow of that tower. His voice had gone very low. A reclusive man, a gifted man, whose strangeness everyone forgave because his pictures were so beautiful. The cellar went utterly still. "You've seen his house," I whispered. "I sat in it," my father said. "As a child. While my father did business, I was too young to understand, and I remember being afraid of the paintings on the walls and not knowing why." He looked at me, and the grief in his face had become something else now, something I had never seen in him and would never have believed him capable of. Resolve. The girls were watching me. I know that now. I have known it for 40 years and told myself I imagined it. 8 girls on the walls of a beautiful house under a bell rung for the dead, watching a frightened child, and I grew up and renounced the whole world rather than go back and understand what I had seen. He came down the last 3 steps. He stood in front of me, and for the first time in my life, he put his gloved hand on my shoulder, and the weight of it was not the weight of a man asserting ownership, but of one steadying himself against a thing long avoided. "I know where she is, Draco. God help me, I have always known. Bring the portrait. We go through together, and we wake my blood on the other side, and we go to the town of the bell." I went up for her. I lifted her from the wall in the grey dawn light, and for once I did not wait for the dark to hear her. I held her close and said, "I know where you are. We're coming. Both of us. Hold on. Stay awake. We're coming for you." And I did not know if the daylight let her hear it, but I thought, I will always think that the wet brown eyes in their frozen half-turn looked back at me with something that had not been there before, something that had stopped being grief and become, against all the years of it, hope. I carried her down. My father had opened the cabinet wide. The dark inside it leaned toward the 2 of us, patient and hungry, the inside of the word, and my father looked at it, the door to the world he had spent his life sealing shut. and drew one long breath and stepped through first into the dark he had sworn never to enter again, for the sun he had tried so hard to keep out of it. I held the portrait against my chest, and I followed my father into the dark. We came out into the manor, and my father wept. I had never seen him shed a tear in my life, and he did not make a sound now. He simply stood at the foot of the great stone stair in the hall of grey dust, looking up into the dark he could not see the ceiling of, and the water ran down his still face, while the rest of him stayed perfectly composed, as though the grief belonged to some other man wearing his body. 40 years, he said. I told myself I'd dreamed it, the size of it, the cold. He turned slowly, taking in the rotting tapestries, the slashed portraits turned to the walls. He died in this house, my father, alone, I think. There was no one left who would come. He looked at me. And you walked into it in the dark and woke your blood on the first night, while I needed teachers and years. You're more his grandson than I ever wanted you to be. Then teach me to use it for something he never would have, I said. Wake yours. We don't have time. He set the portrait carefully against the wall. I had carried her through, and she was silent in the daylight that fell grey through the high broken windows. And he took my grandfather's wand from my hand, and he held it for a moment with an expression I could not read. And then he closed his eyes and spoke a word, and the sealed thing in him broke open the way it had broken open in me. He staggered. The dust on the floor blew outward from him in a ring. When he opened his eyes, there was a light in them that had never been in my father's eyes in all my life, and I understood that I had spent 19 years living with a banked fire, and here, at last, was the flame. He gave me back my grandfather's wand and went to the gallery and took down one of the slashed portraits and pulled a wand from a hidden seam in the frame. His own, I realized, hidden here the day he renounced everything. And over the hours that followed, in that cold and ruined house, my father taught me to fight. I will not set down all of it. The learning was hard, and the time was short, and we both knew the sleep in her sleeping body was deepening while we drilled. He taught me to shield. He taught me to bind. He taught me the spells that do not appear in gentle books, the ones the old families knew, because the man we were going to face had been killing for longer than a lifetime and would not be undone by light and lifted chairs. And as we worked, the portrait against the wall watched us, silent in the daylight, and I felt her watching, and I worked harder. When the light began to fail outside the broken windows, my father lowered his wand. Enough, he said. You're not ready. You won't be ready in a year. But she doesn't have a year, and neither, I think, do you. I've watched you these hours, Draco, and I know now you'd go alone tonight if I forbade it. He almost smiled. So, we go together, now, while it's dark, because his house will be watched, and the dark is the only friend we have. We went to the town of the Bell. I cannot tell you the manner of our going. The old families have ways of crossing distance that I had no name for then and will not try to name now. I know only that the dark folded and unfolded around us, and then we were standing in a narrow cobbled lane in a town that smelled of wood smoke and cold stone, and the river under a sky gone to that deep blue black. It only reaches far from any city. and rising over the crooked roofs was a tower, and in the tower hung a great bell, black against the stars. And in the shadow of the tower stood a house, taller than its neighbours, every window dark but one. My father went still. "That one," he breathed. "I'd know it in any life. That's where my father took me. That's the house with the watching paintings." He looked at me. "He's home. The light's lit. Draco, listen to me. When we go in, you find her, the body. That's your task, and only that. Leave the painter to me. Do you understand? I have 40 years of being afraid of that house to spend, and I would rather spend it than have you anywhere near him. Find her, wake her if you can, and get her out. Promise me." I promised. I lied, I think, in the promising. I had no intention of leaving my father alone with a thing that had killed for longer than a lifetime. But I promised, and we went up to the dark door, and my father laid his woken hand against it, and the lock gave with a sound like a held breath let go. Inside, the house was warm. That was the horror of it, exactly as she had said about the beauty of the paintings. The house was warm and lamplit and lovely, hung with pictures so fine the eye wanted to rest on them, and on every wall were girls, young, beautiful, caught in their half-turns, in their strange robes, watching us come in out of the dark with eyes that had been painted by a master and filled by a murderer. 8 of them. I counted as I climbed, my grandfather's wand sweating in my fist. 8 girls on the warm, bright walls, and not one of them wept, because there was no one left inside their sleeping bodies to weep for, because they had all gone quiet, everyone, while no one came. We found the painter in his studio at the top of the house. He was not what I expected. He was slight and silver-haired and gentle-faced, and he was standing at an easel with a brush in his hand and a sketch half-finished on the canvas, and he did not turn when we came in. "I wondered," he said mildly in a voice that was indeed beautiful, a voice you would follow anywhere. "When the Malfoys would come back. Your father sat in my parlour as a boy, you know. Such frightened eyes. I always thought I'd have him in the end." He turned then and smiled, and the smile was the worst thing I had ever seen, because it was kind. And here he is, all grown, with a son, 2 for the price of 1. How the old blood does run. What happened then happened fast, and I have put it together since out of pieces, because in the moment it was only noise and light and terror. My father moved first, and the room came apart, the air filled with fire and force, and the screaming of the 8 portraits on the floors below. The painter did not move like a slight silver-haired man. He moved like the centuries he had stolen, and my father, woken only that day, fought him to a standstill and no further. And I saw my father go down to one knee with blood on his mouth, and the painter raise his brush like a wand for the final stroke. And I did the thing I had promised not to do. I did not look for the body. I looked at the man who was about to kill my father, and the old blood in me, the blood that had remembered magic before I learned it, rose up all at once the way it had risen in the tower, and I did not speak a spell I had been taught. I spoke the word that came up out of the sealed place, the language I did not know, and my grandfather's wand became a bar of white fire in my hand, and I struck. The painter turned at the last instant and met it, and for one moment the 2 of us were locked. His beautiful, terrible will against the woken inheritance of a boy who 3 weeks ago had not believed in any of it. And I felt him probing at me, felt the lure in him, reaching for the trust in me, the way it had reached for 8 girls before. Follow me, sit for me, let me draw just this one thing out of you. And I thought of her voice in the dark saying, "You were the only one who came when I cried," and the lure found nothing in me to take hold of, because every part of me that could be lured was already given, already spoken for, already hers. He broke. I felt it happen. The centuries letting go all at once, the stolen years unspooling, the slight silver-haired body suddenly only as old as it truly was, which was older than any body can bear to be. He crumbled where he stood, soundless, to dust and then to nothing, and his brush fell to the floor and rolled, and the half-finished sketch on the easel, some girl he had marked for his 9th and final theft, somewhere out in the world, never now to be taken, faded slowly from the canvas as though it had never been drawn. The silence afterward was enormous. My father got to his feet, wiping the blood from his mouth, staring at me, and there was something in his face that took me a moment to name, because I had never been its object before. It was pride. "Find her," he said softly. "Quickly now. With him gone, the bindings on the bodies will be failing all at once. Find her before the failing takes her too." I found her in a room at the back of the house, behind a door that opened to my hand. It was a small plain room, nothing like the warm bright halls, a narrow bed, a window onto the dark tower, and on the bed a girl. The girl, her face, the face from the portrait made flesh, her chest rising and falling so faintly I had to hold my own breath to be sure of it. The brown hair the painter had rendered in oil lay real across a thin pillow. I went to my knees beside the bed. I had carried her painted self through worlds, and I had never once been able to touch her. And now her living hand lay open on the blanket, and I took it, and it was warm, and that warmth went through me like the first word she had ever spoken in the dark. But her breathing was slowing. Even as I knelt there, even as the painter's death undid his hold, I could feel the sleep deepening rather than lifting, the long-deferred quiet of 8 years coming for her all at once, the body too far gone down its dark road to find its way back alone, the half on the wall my father had said, and the half in the bed severed, and the painter who had severed them was dust, and there was no one to put them back together, no spell in any book, only a sleeping girl whose breath was going out, and a portrait somewhere below in the dark, and a boy kneeling between them with old blood in his veins, and no idea what to do. Except that I did know. I knew the way I had known the word burned over the cabinet, the way my feet had known the stair. I let go of her hand. I ran down through that house of fading paintings, down to where I had leaned her portrait against the wall, and I carried her painted self back up to the little room, and I set the frame against the headboard so that the painted girl looked down upon the sleeping one, 2 halves of one severed soul finally in the same room for the first time in 8 years. And I knelt between them with my grandfather's wand, and I did not reach for any spell I had been taught. I reached for the only thing I was certain of in any world. I put one hand flat on the cold painted canvas and one hand warm around the living fingers. and I spoke into the space between them, the word that had been rising in me since the first night I heard her cry through the wall and called it pipes. And the wand went to white fire a third time, and the light leapt between my two hands, between the paint and the breathing, and the room filled with a sound like a great slow bell, and the girl on the bed drew one enormous shuddering breath, and the brown eyes in the painting closed, and the brown eyes on the pillow opened. The painting was only a painting after that. I knew it the moment the light went out of the room, knew it before I looked, the way you know a house is empty the instant you step into it. When I turned to the frame against the headboard, the wet living shine had gone out of the brown eyes. They were beautiful still, rendered by a master's hand, but they did not follow me, and they did not weep. And when I said her name to them, softly, the way I had said it 100 times in the dark, nothing answered. The half that had hung on my wall and cried through the silence of my father's house and trusted me enough to point me toward a door in my own cellar had gone home at last to the body it was severed from. There was no one left inside the paint. There never would be again. I should have felt the loss of it more sharply than I did. For 3 weeks, that painting had been the only thing in any world I loved, and now the soul I had loved had left it forever. And yet, I could not grieve, because the soul had not gone out. It had gone across, and the proof of the crossing was lying on the narrow bed, drawing one astonished breath after another, alive. She did not wake fully. That is the thing no story prepares you for, that you can pour your whole self into a rescue, and the rescue does not sit up and thank you and walk out into the morning. 8 years of severed sleep do not lift like a curtain. Her eyes had opened, and they had found my face for one moment, brown and bewildered and impossibly alive. And then they had drifted closed again, and her breathing had steadied into something deep and ordinary and human, the breathing of a person sleeping rather than a person dying. And my father, kneeling beside me with the blood still drying at the corner of his mouth, had said very quietly, "That's enough, Draco. That's the hard part done. The rest is time." We brought her out of that house under the dark tower, the 8 quiet portraits watching us go, and we did not leave them there. My father saw to it afterward. The bodies found, the empty graves explained as far as they could ever be explained to families who had buried their daughters years before. 8 girls who had been mourned as dead were quietly, terribly, confirmed as dead at last, their souls long fled with their stolen years, and there was no joy in that, only the cold mercy of an ending. But the 9th, the last of the 9, she we carried into the light. There is a hospital in that hidden world. I had not known such a place existed, had not known anything existed 3 weeks before. A place of clean stone and pale green light, and healers who moved without hurry, the only unhurried people I had met since my father, and these unhurried for kindness rather than for cold. They took her from us with great gentleness. They told us what I already knew, that the body had been a long time down a dark road and would be a long time coming back up it, that there was no spell to speed it, that she would wake by degrees over many days, that we should not expect her to know us at first, or to know herself. "Go home," they told me that first night. "Rest. Come back tomorrow." I went home. I did not rest. I came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. My father did not come with me. He had his own reckoning to make with the world he had stepped back into after 40 years. There were things to be set right, accounts to be settled, a renunciation to be quietly undone. But he did not seal the cabinet again. That was the gift he gave me, in the end, larger than he ever said aloud. He left the door open. He let me cross. Every morning I went down to the cellar of the cold white house, and I stepped into the dark that was the inside of the word, and I came out in the manor that was no longer ruined now the two Malfoys had woken in it. And from there I went to the hospital of pale green light, and I sat beside her bed. She did not wake for me those first days. She slept and breathed, and her face was the face I had loved in oil for 3 weeks, made warm, made real, made mortal. And I sat beside her in a hard chair, and I talked to her the way I had talked to her painting, because I did not know how else to be near her, and because some part of me believed she could hear me through the sleep, the way she had heard me through the wall. I told her about the journey it had taken to find her. I told her about the auction and the dead man's warning, and the first night I heard her cry and called it pipes. I told her how I had carried her down to the cellar to make her stop and could not stay away. I told her about the cabinet and the word burned over it, and my grandfather's wand, and the slashed portraits screaming through the floor, and my father weeping in the dust of a house he had sworn never to enter. I told her things I had told no one, the way I always had with her, because she was still the only one in any world who had ever made me feel that I could speak and not be used. The healers found me at it more than once, and they did not stop me. One of them, an old woman with kind eyes, told me quietly that the ones who are talked to come back faster, that the voice is a rope let down into the dark, that I should keep talking. So I kept talking, and I watched her face, and I understood, somewhere in that long week of one-sided words, that I had fallen the rest of the way, that whatever I had felt for the painting had been only the beginning of it, a love for a soul I could hear but never reach, and that now the soul had a warm hand and a slowing and quickening breath and a real brown gaze that had found my face for one moment before it closed, and I was lost in a way that had no bottom to it. I did not tell her that. How could I tell her that? She did not know me. She had spoken to a voice in the dark and pointed it at a door. She had no idea that the voice had crossed 2 worlds and woken its own buried blood and sat beside her bed for a week, pouring out its whole secret heart. To her, when she woke, I would be a stranger, the man who had carried her body out of a murderer's house, a debt to be acknowledged and discharged, nothing more. I made myself understand that every day in the hard chair, so that when it came, I would not flinch. She woke on the 8th day. I did not see it happen. I had risen to go. The light was failing outside the tall green windows. The healers were beginning their evening rounds, and I had said what I had to say for the day, and stood and turned toward the door with my grandfather's wand in my coat and the long crossing home ahead of me. I had my hand on the latch. "Wait," she said. I turned. She was sitting up, not far, propped against the pillows, pale, thin, her brown hair loose around a face still hollowed by 8 years of sleep. But sitting up, awake, her eyes open and clear and fixed on me with the full living weight of a gaze I'd only ever known frozen in a half-turn, And now it moved. Now it tracked me as I turned. Now it was looking at me the way the painting had always seemed to and never truly could. "It was you," she said. Her voice was rough with disuse, but it was her voice, the tired, sharp voice from the dark made fully real. The voice, all that time, through the wall, in the cold, in the dark, it was you. They told me a man brought me out. They didn't tell me it was the voice. Her eyes moved over my face, searching it, matching it against something. "I never saw you, all those nights, and I never once saw your face. I built it out of the dark, and here it is." Something trembled at the corner of her mouth. "You came. 8 others died because no one came. And you heard me crying, and you called it pipes, and then you crossed the whole world anyway. You came." "I couldn't not," I said. It was all I had. It was the truest thing I owned. She looked at me for a long moment, and I made myself stand and bear it, the gratitude I had braced for, the thank you that would be the door closing, the debt acknowledged and discharged. I had practiced not flinching. I was ready. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all of it, for coming when no one came." And then she tilted her head, exactly the angle of the half-turn the painter had trapped her in, except that now she chose it. Now it was hers. And the trembling at the corner of her mouth resolved itself into something I had not let myself hope for. Not the polite warmth of a stranger discharging a debt, but the open, searching, slightly mischievous regard of a person who has decided she is not finished with you. "Sit down," she said. "You've been talking to me for 8 days. The healers told me. They said you wouldn't stop." Colour was coming back into her face as I watched, the first faint living colour I had ever seen there. It's a terrible thing, to be talked to for a week and not be able to answer. I've a great deal saved up. The least you can do is let me say some of it back. I had crossed 2 worlds. I had woken blood that had slept for generations and faced down a thing that had killed for centuries and lived. And I stood there in the doorway of that pale green room with my hand frozen on the latch, undone entirely by a girl propped on her pillows telling me to sit down. I sat down, and we talked. Not the way I had talked to the painting, into a silence I had to fill alone. We talked the way 2 people talk who have somehow already known each other a long time in the dark and are only now meeting in the light. She asked, and I answered, and she answered, and the evening went on outside the windows, and the healers did their rounds and forgot about us, and I learned the living shape of the soul I had loved as oil, that she was quick and stubborn and braver than was good for her, and that she laughed in a way the painter had never caught, because the painter had taken her before she had anything left to laugh about. She made me laugh. I had not known I could. We talked until the green light went to grey and then to dark, and neither of us reached for a lamp, because the dark had never been our enemy. The dark was where we had always been able to hear each other. And when at last the old healer with the kind eyes came to send me home, gently, smiling, telling me the patient needed her rest and I needed mine, I rose again to go. I gathered my coat. I felt the old ache of it, the leaving, though it was a smaller ache now, lit as it was by the certainty that I would cross the worlds again tomorrow and find her here, awake, waiting, real. I had my hand on the latch again, and I turned to say goodnight. She was watching me from the pillows, the lamplight from the corridor falling across her face, her brown eyes warm and wide awake and fixed on mine. And there was something in them that made my heart stop in my chest, the way it had stopped the first night I heard her cry through the wall. Except that this was the opposite of grief. This was its exact and perfect opposite. "Draco," she said, my name in her mouth, spoken in the light by a living girl who had chosen to say it. "When they let me out of here, when I can walk." The corner of her mouth lifted, and the whole of her face came alight with it, mischief and warmth, and a question that was not really a question at all. "Shall we go and have a butterbeer?" I crossed the room before I knew I had moved. I took her hand, warm, real, her fingers closing around mine without the smallest hesitation, the way they never could have through paint. And I sat on the edge of the bed, and she was already leaning toward me. The half-turn become a whole one at last, and I cupped her face the way I had wanted to from the first night I stood before a portrait in the dark and called the sound of her weeping anything but what it was. "Yes," I said against her mouth. "Yes, 1,000 of them." And I kissed her. The girl I had fallen for as a painting, warm and breathing and alive in my hands, kissed me back as though she had been waiting through 8 years of dark and 100 nights of crying for exactly this. And somewhere very far off, in a town under a tower, a great slow bell began to ring. Not 3 strokes for the dead this time, but on and on, the way bells ring for the living, for weddings, for homecomings, for the end of a long winter. And I did not hear it, because I was not listening for anything anymore. I had found what I crossed the worlds for. She was here, and she was warm, and she was kissing me back. And for the first time in my whole bored, gilded, sleepwalking life, I was exactly, completely and forever where I was meant to be.
Thank you for staying until the end. I want to tell you why I wrote this story. I think we all feel alone sometimes. We live in busy houses or quiet rooms, and no one really sees us. Draco had everything: money, a big white house, but he was empty inside. And then he heard someone crying through the wall. That part stayed with me. The night he turned on the lamp and he cried and the crying stopped. He told himself it was just the pipes, but deep down he knew someone was there, someone needed him. I think love is like that. It finds us when we are not ready. It asks us to believe in something we cannot prove. Draco was a man who believed in nothing, and he crossed 2 worlds for a voice in the dark. So here's my small wish for you. If you ever hear someone crying, do not call it the pipes. Do not turn away. Be the one who comes. Maybe she is on the wall. Maybe she is right next to you. Thank you for listening. Take care of your heart, and I will see you in the next story.